All right, thank you. I'll call to order the March 16th, 2021 meeting of Ag and Rural Affairs. The first item on the agenda is approval of minutes of the February 16th meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions?
I'll just chime in, and it probably goes without saying, but that should say 2/16/21. I believe the agenda says 20, but
Oh, thank you, 2/16/21, thank you. Do we have a motion?
Motion to move.
Randy, second from Roger. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Any public appearances for items that are not on the agenda? I don't see anyone here that would be for someone not on the agenda, so we'll move on. Agenda review. Wade, any changes to the agenda?
no changes.
Okay. All right. Item 5A is agriculture accessory related uses in the city agricultural zoning districts. And we have one person who is registered, Jeff Schleicher, to speak. And Jeff, if you want to at some point, just kind of flag me down and let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Wade for the staff report. I think the idea right now is just kind of wrap this up and move this one on. So what things do we still need to kind of sort out? I think some of us saw the PowerPoint that you sent out later in the afternoon. Do you want to?
Yep, I will go through all that. Just, I guess, first and foremost, yep, Ed's right. We hope to come to some closure today on the issues we've been discussing the past few months. More specifically, again, just this idea of a rural event venue and how does that happen in the city's agricultural districts. So again, we do have the packet. There is a memo in the packet that basically is a kind of a repeat of the memo that you've seen a couple times now with a few changes. And I think what I'm going to do is work from that PowerPoint that I sent you all and I hope that will really clarify a lot of the issues that we've been discussing. And then we'll tie that back into, again, the memo and then hopefully reach a decision today. And if folks haven't had a chance to look at the PowerPoint, that's fine. I will go slowly with it. And again, I hope it will clarify a lot of the discussion the committee's been having. So with that, I will share my screen.
Wade, we're having some difficulty hearing you.
Okay. Is it a choppy thing or just a level of noise?
That's better now.
Better? Okay.
Yes.
So yep, just interrupt me if you're having trouble hearing me.
Okay.
Okay, so a few things we want to cover, right? I'd like to cover. I want to talk about where we've been with this idea of rural event venues. I want to talk about what I'll call knowns, and then I want to talk about what I'll call unknowns. Then we'll talk about an option, or actually a couple options, per direction from the committee that I got last month. We'll talk about scenarios that I hope will help clarify those options. Certainly we can discuss things, and then again, ideally we can move towards a decision today on rural event venues. So again, I just want to talk about where we've been. It's been a few months, so in my head, it was good to kind of clarify, what we've done, so we don't repeat, discussions from previous months. So if folks remember, we did start this discussion roughly back in October of last year. We basically presented the issue, staff presented the issue, and if you remember, staff did recommend to not allow, at that point we didn't call them rural event venues, we didn't have a name yet for them, but we didn't want to allow these general types of venues in the city's rural areas. And the premise of that recommendation was that we had formerly allowed what I'll call limited commercial and business use of rural lands under a previous city zoning district. We called that our RD district, our rural development district. But years ago, we disallowed that district. We don't zone to that anymore. So, and the idea of why we did that is we thought that was better land use policy. So to be consistent with that policy, again, staff was recommending that we steer clear of these rural event venues. That being said, the committee directed staff to explore ways to allow these types of uses. So we did some research. We presented case studies. This was in November. And if folks remember, the gist of the case studies was that when towns or cities or counties allow for these types of uses, basically what they do is they recognize them as commercial or business uses of rural lands. They don't recognize them as agricultural uses. And what they also do is they separate these uses from larger ag parcels, again, to accommodate these types of venues and these types of uses. So that brings us to last month. So staff did present, we came up with a name, rural event venue. We defined it, and we came up with a pretty loose non-farm option, and that was probably some misunderstanding of staff in terms of what the committee wanted, but that was what I'll call a non-farm option, a very loose allowance of these types of uses in the city's agricultural areas. Excuse me. And again, per that discussion in February, staff was directed to essentially modify that definition and come up with a scenario, an option that more closely connected a rural event venue to a broader farm or agricultural use. So with all that in mind, that's what I will talk about next. I'll talk about, again, some known and unknowns, and then we'll talk about, again, that modified rural event venue definition. We'll talk about this idea of tying that event venue back to a farming use. There's a couple options that I will present to the committee. We'll talk about some scenarios that I hope will help clarify these options. And certainly we can discuss things, and then ultimately, again, hopeful for a recommendation at the end of the discussion. So what I do want to do now is talk about the knowns, and I think what I'm going to do is after I get through these, I want to just clarify if the committee understands these knowns and is in agreement that this is where we're at. So again, number one, I did touch on it, but rural event venues are essentially non-agricultural commercial business uses of rural / traditionally agricultural land. So that's, in my head, known number one. Per that type of use, these types of uses cannot be allowed in the city's AX zoning district. And that is per state statute. So that's known number two. Known number three, if the city does want to accommodate these types of uses, they must be accommodated in an ag district other than AX. And what staff has been proposing the past few months is these uses would happen in what's called our AS, our Ag Small District. And that's allowable. That's, again, number three. Number four, my understanding is the committee wants to allow these types of uses with a clarification that these uses need to be tied to essentially a farm use in some manner. And we'll talk about how that can look. Number five is, given the magnitude and impact of these types of uses and consistent with city policy, these uses, should we come to a conclusion on what they entail, would be designated as what we call a conditional use. Not a permitted use, but a conditional use with all sorts of listed conditions that allow for this to happen in our ag district. So I think I'm going to stop there and just maybe I guess I can't see you all, but maybe Ed as the chair can take a head count, just make sure that the committee understands all of these knowns.
So are there any questions on anyone's understanding of these 5 items, or are we clear on this? I was unclear before on whether this could be done in AX, and Wade's clarified, no, it can't. I mean, it has to be rezoned. AS is a possibility. I don't think we're thinking about rezoning things into commercial zoning. I don't think that's an option that we have talked about or probably want to consider. But it would have to be rezoned to AS in order to do it, which also gets into, and I'm sure Wade will get to this too, the question of lot size. Because if we're going to rezone something, what all are we rezoning? So, any questions or comments on the items on this page here?
Microphone? Oh, sorry. Okay. With said uses to associated with farm in some manner, could you give me an example of what that would be?
I got about 3 or 4 slides devoted just to that, Roger. That's upcoming.
Okay, thank you.
But again, and I think, I can't remember, I know you had to leave last meeting early, but the direction I got from the majority of the committee at the end of the last meeting was to, again, tie this to a farm use.
Okay.
Okay, if there's nothing else, I think we're good on that page, Wade.
Okay, good. So now I got about 4 unknowns, and this is the stuff that, really is the meat of, if these rural event venues are to be allowed, what will the use and the requirement parameters look like? So I guess unknown number 1, and to me, this is probably, we talked about this, so there has been some discussion on this. So what lot size parameters, again, in the AS district, should be utilized for rural event venues? Now, last time I did present some lot size parameters, basically saying a minimum of 3 acres and a maximum of 10 acres. Now, rationale for those lot size parameters would be that the minimum, the 3 acre, is consistent with our existing AS district in terms of allowing a minimum lot size of 3 acres. And the maximum in the AS is actually let's say 34.99. At 35 acres, then you get kicked into the AX district. So I'm saying not a 34.99 max. I'm saying a 10 acre max. And the reason I'm proposing that is that I believe that max would be large enough to accommodate any likely venue scenario that we would likely see in the city, and the farm requirement, which we'll talk about later. And I think this is the most important thing in my head. It would also mitigate potential farmland loss should an unforeseen policy change take place in the future. The idea is we're trying to keep the footprint small because we are rezoning agricultural land. And, we always create policy with the best intention, but sometimes there's unforeseen consequences, there's changes in policy, and by not doing a 34.99 max, but a 10 acre max, it's my opinion that we're potentially mitigating, again, potential farmland loss should any future policy change happen. Now, I think what I'd like to do here is, before we dig into the real meat of this stuff, I'd like to get through everything. And then I feel like once I do that, some questions might be answered. But I would like to stop with each of these, let's call them unknowns, and just ask if there's any, I'll call them clarifying questions, just words you don't understand or anything like that. But again, if there's real detailed, meaty questions, let's hold on to those and talk about those at the end. So any, I guess, clarifying questions at this point?
Wade, the one thing I had is, when I look at the language that you put together, I don't see the 3 acre minimum in the language in the draft. Which, I mean, it seems fine to me. I see the maximum, I don't see the minimum.
Okay, yeah, I may have, okay, yeah, that might have been an you're talking about in the memo, Ed, in the,
Yes.
yeah, that's probably an oversight. Good pickup, yep.
And the other question that I had is, if we've got a property that is already zoned AS and is more than 10 acres, I don't know that I want to necessarily require that a new lot be created. So maybe some clarifying language is that if a new lot is to be created, it would be a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 10 acres.
Okay,
Does that seem reasonable to? Yeah. Okay. Well, so we're probably good on that topic, Wade.
okay. And again, we can come back and pick at this. I just want to get through everything because I think questions might be answered as we move along.
Thanks.
Okay, so unknown number 2. essentially what is our definition of a rural event venue. And if folks remember at the February meeting, I did present a definition. That was the first time we defined the term, first time we used the term. Now that it was a pretty loose definition, it allowed for a lot of potential scenarios and basically not requiring, again, kind of this farming element. So again, per committee direction, I have tightened up that definition and I'm just gonna read it to you, I think, just so people can process it. So the proposal in front of you today would be an existing or new agricultural building. Now that's a very specific term. That means a building that has some agricultural purpose, or an existing building. Now that could mean an old barn that isn't being used for agriculture, of a similar rustic architectural style. Now what this definition has differently than the one we looked at a month ago was where we say or an existing building. We also said we said an existing or a new building. So what this is saying is if it's a building and it's not used for agriculture and it's not existing, you cannot build a new building to be a rural event venue. Now, I'm not going to read all the rest of the stuff to you because that's basically saying, you know, what the venue can do. It basically can hold events that aren't agriculture. But again, this definition has been tweaked to basically get rid of a scenario where you could build a new non-agricultural building to also function as a rural event venue. So again, let's not get into the meat of this right now, but just any clarifying questions of kind of what I've presented.
Anything? No?
And again, just, you know, what I'm doing here is giving you the proposal and then the rationale. Again, the rationale obviously was my understanding of committee direction from the February meeting. So number 3, unknown. Again, we have touched on this at the February meeting. Essentially what we're saying is, you know, what are the conditions of use for rural event venues? You know, as we talked about in the known slide, this will be a conditional use given the complexity of the use, but what will those conditions be? And if folks remember at the last meeting, I presented, I think it was a list of about 13 conditions. Those were all in the memo. We discussed those, generally speaking. My impression was folks were pretty okay with those list of conditions, with the exception of we needed to tie it back to a farming use. So I didn't list all those conditions. Those are in the memo. We can, again, pick at those if you want, you know, a little bit later. But again, I am proposing a list of conditions as contained in that staff memo. And the rationale for those conditions would be, again, looking at relevant case studies, you know, what other people do, how they condition these types of uses, adherence to existing city land use policy. Again, we want to be, you know, other uses that are conditional. This kind of falls into that bucket of a use that should be conditional. And then again, I understood committee direction last month to generally like that list of conditions. So again, at this point, I can take general clarifying questions about this idea of use conditions.
Anything? Okay, I think we're good on that too, Wade.
Okay, so I think this will become the meat of our discussion today. This is actually use condition A in that list. So again, I'm going under the premise that the maximum lot size to allow these types of venues will be 10 acres, you know, per what we just discussed. And the venue shall be part of a farm defined as follows. Now, I just want to clarify in the memo, I think I did give you a definition. That's one definition we can use, but I did come up with another definition we can use as well. So basically, we'll have 2 options that I will present to you, and then we'll discuss them. Certainly, the committee can come up with a third option. I feel like the 2 options I'll present are pretty thorough, and I would definitely recommend going with one of those, but certainly the committee can come up with a third option. But again, I think the real the real premise of this unknown is, what is a farm? So I think with that, I'm just going to jump right into this idea of what is a farm. So again, two options as I see them, an A and B. The first being, essentially what we're doing is we're defining what a farm is. Now, definition, option A would be all land under common ownership, primarily devoted to an agricultural use. Now, that definition comes from state statute, chapter 91, which has implications for our AX district. It doesn't have implications for this AS district, but I think it's a good definition of a farm, and it's commonly used, in the state of Wisconsin for a farm. Option B is also from state statute. It's also from our current city ordinance and zoning ordinance. And really what it does is it's a definition essentially very relevant to our AX district, because our AX district at its core is a district that allows certain eligible landowners to be eligible for a state tax credit. And for them to be eligible for that tax credit, land farmers need to show a certain type of income. So that's what you see in B. Essentially what B is saying is that a definition of a farm is the A that I just talked about above, all land under common ownership, primarily devoted to an agricultural use, and this idea of tying a farm into specific income requirements. And I'm not going to read all those to you, but basically it's saying $6,000 a year in gross farm revenues, which basically means farm products, or $18,000 in gross farm revenues over a few years combined. Now, if I had to kind of just generally categorize these options, I would say option A is a looser definition of farm. Option B is a more strict definition of farm. Obviously, these are the two options I'm presenting you. We don't have a rationale as to going with one or the other. But again, I think in terms of the rationale of presenting them to you, again, I think they're really good, solid definitions of farm that are commonly understood, that are used in state statute, and one of them is also currently used in our existing city ordinance. So before we get into the scenarios, again, any general clarifying questions on these options, with the understanding that we will pick at these in more detail once we talk about scenarios.
Any questions on this? I mean, I'm a little unclear on what the difference is between 6,000 in the current year or.
Basically what it's saying at is, as long as you, but the first part is saying in 1 year, you need to show $6,000 in the current year. Or it's saying in the previous 3 years, you can make $5,000 1 year, $10,000 the next year, and $3,000 the next year.
So the 18,000 is 3 years in aggregate,
Cumulative, yes.
An average.
Yep.
not average.
No, but it
No.
could be a combination of those three.
Yeah, and-
County uses very similar wording, or at least used to.
And Mark, that's probably right from state statute. That's what most places do. Yep.
Well, what I see is, aren't they, you say option A is a little bit looser, but isn't it the same as option B because they're both under the same statute?
No, the statute define, well, they're actually different statutes, and they define the term differently in the separate statutes.
Oh, it is, oh, so the one is 91.
91 and
71,
71,
one's
yep,
91,
yep.
okay.
And they're designed to be ambiguous to a point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can we just add the word, after 18,000, say in aggregate? I mean,
Sure.
just
Yeah,
so it's
if the
clear.
committee
for
likes that option.
That's
I-
for that 3-year
yeah.
period. That was puzzling to me.
And just so I'm clear, I think actually in our zoning ordinance, our definition of farm is a direct reference to statute by number. It's not words. You know what I mean?
Right.
It just says farm, see state statute chapter 71. So there might be a little bit of a concern in modifying. I mean, if that's needed for clarification, I think that's fine. But the definition just refers to state statute. And state statute doesn't say aggregate.
I prefer A myself.
But hold on, let's not, no decisions yet. Let's just strict clarifying questions on these options. Because I will present scenarios, and then I think folks will be fully informed on what these options mean in the real world, and then let's discuss. So with that, can I move into scenarios?
Yes.
Okay, so what I tried to do was, I mean, I believe I covered all the bases, but I tried to come up with every potential scenario that I could foresee where someone would want to do a rural event venue in the city. I don't believe I missed any scenarios, but we'll talk about that. So scenario 1A, an existing farmer, and that term is broadly defined, but I think, I'm talking about, I think, when we say farmer, like a Durford Brothers or, folks that are farmers in the true sense, that they want to build a new or use an existing ag building. Basically what that means is a building that would serve both agricultural uses, but also have capacity to be a rural event venue. Or they use an existing building to solely serve as a rural event venue. Now by existing building, let's just envision a barn, an old barn that's no longer used to support the farm, it's just sitting there. They can use that. They can use everything I just described, they can do that under, as a rural event venue. So allowable, yes, given the scenario I just described. The process to do this would be to create a new AS parcel, again, at 3 to 10 acres in size, and adhere to list of use conditions as we've previously discussed. Now, as it relates to a farm requirement, this one's pretty easy. It's pretty simple. Basically what, the farmer, they just continue farming, okay? And what that probably means in all likelihood is that if they want to do a rural event venue, maybe that takes up an acre or two, but the rest of that AS parcel and the rest of their broader farm is just that, it's a farm. So really minimal issues with tying this scenario back into a farm use. So again, where the rubber hits the road with this one is that this scenario would meet farm option A. Again, these are the options I'm talking about, farm option A. This one meets, and likely, I mean, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't. It would also meet farm option B. So I guess at this point, I'm just trying to figure out if it makes sense to discuss these scenarios individually, or if I have 4 scenarios, or we can discuss them individually, or I can get through them all and then we can discuss each. We can go back and discuss. I don't know if I have a preference. Does the committee have a preference? Maybe what I'll do at a minimum is just describe the 1A and the 1B, and then we can
You wanna
talk
go
about the 1A
through
and
the
1B,
scenarios?
because they're very similar, and then we could do the 2A and the 2B.
Wade, let's go through the scenarios first, and then we'll come back and just yay or nay on each.
Okay. So that, again, 1A, 1B is basically the same farmer, but now they want to do a new building solely as a rural event venue, meaning no ag purpose for this building, and it's new. Well, this isn't allowed per the definition we just discussed. If the committee would like to allow for this scenario, the definition would need to be modified to read So basically, the existing definition is there, the red text would be the modification. So it would be modified to read, or an existing or new building of a similar rustic architectural style. If the committee does want to allow this scenario and modify the definition as initially presented, the process and the farm requirement, again, these things would be the same. So again, that's scenario 1B. Scenario 2A, now I'm going to use the term non-farmer. And by that, I mean someone that hasn't historically been a quote-unquote farmer in the city of Fitchburg. So they want to come in, they want to build a new or use an existing ag building. Again, and it gets a little bit muddy here, but essentially what would happen in this scenario, by the literal definitions we're discussing, is if this non-farmer wanted to build a new or use an existing ag building, they could do that, and they essentially become a farmer, because the idea is that they're building an ag building and they're gonna have agricultural use on their property. You may not be a 200-acre farm that's making 100, 200 grand a year profit, but it meets the literal definition of a farm. So again, they can come in, they can build a new ag building, they can use an existing ag building to serve both an ag capacity and a rural event venue capacity. Or let's say we've got an old rundown barn. Farmer Joe doesn't want the barn anymore. This person says, hey, that looks like a great spot for a rural event venue. That person can come in, parcel off that property with the barn, retrofit that barn, and it can become a rural event venue because it's an existing building. It's not a new building. So again, everything I just described would be allowable per the current definition. Process, same as the other scenario 1A and 1B. Create new AS parcel, 3 to 10 acres in size, and adhere to list of use conditions. Now this scenario gets a little bit, I would say, looser with this idea of a farm requirement. It still meets the literal definitions of farming as we've discussed, but when people think about farms and farmers, you know, that you might have a little bit of a different idea. So what we're saying with this farm requirement is that a majority of the AS parcel acreage shall be in agricultural use. Now, I also want to point out that there could be additional lands outside of the 10-acre AS parcel that are part of this farm, and I'll explain this. So what I'm getting at here is you could have a person come in by, let's say, 40 acres with an existing barn on it. They could parcel off 10 of that acres for the rural event venue, you know, fix up the barn. Technically speaking, that 10 acres, if 5 or more acres of that parcel are in agricultural use, meaning crops being grown, that could meet the definition of farm, depending on the options that the committee likes. Similarly, again, the 40-acre parcel we just talked about, there's a 30-acre remainder that also becomes AS, still being farmed. That could be part of the farm as well. But technically, that person could also sell off that 30 acres, and as long as their remaining 10-acre parcel with the rural event venue has 5 or more acres of agricultural use on it, meaning probably crops, that could potentially meet the definition of a farm. So where the rubber hits the road here is that this scenario would likely meet farm option A. Again, all land under common ownership, primarily devoted to an agricultural use. But, and it may potentially meet the option B with the income requirements, dependent upon the specifics of the scenario. So then again, I know I threw a lot at you there, but we can go back and pick at that. So 2B, this is the last scenario I have. Again, same person that we just talked about in scenario 2A. They want to build a new building solely as a rural event venue, no ag capacity at all. As per the definition I presented to you, this would not be allowable because we are not allowing new buildings that aren't agricultural buildings, okay? Now, if the committee wishes to allow this scenario, the definition would need to be modified, same as the scenario 1B. It would need to be modified to read an existing or new building of a similar rustic architectural style. So we're not saying it needs to be an ag building, we're just saying it needs to be an existing or new building that looks like a barn. If the committee likes this scenario or wants to allow for this scenario, again, definition would be modified, and process and farm requirement, as discussed in scenario 2A, would also remain the same. So with that, I just want to wrap this up by saying I think the issues in front of the committee are, what do you want the definition of rural event venue to be? And that will have implications for allowance or disallowance of the use scenarios I've described. So that's question one. Question two is, what definition of farm? That will also likely have implications for scenarios I've just described. So again, definition and definition of rural event venue, and essentially definition of farm. Those are the two issues that I foresee that need clarification in these two options, or in this general discussion. So with that, hopefully their heads aren't spinning or you're not falling asleep, but that's the issues as I see them, and certainly we can pick at any or all of these, anything I presented.
Okay, so let's go back, Wade, to your definition of a rural event venue. And I think we need to decide whether we like it the way it is. To me, I believe this is what we discussed at the last meeting. I think that this is accurate. And I don't think changing it to or is in keeping with what we discussed at the last meeting. I think you've got it right.
Yeah, and just again to clarify, we've got this definition, which, and then a proposed modification. The only change would be adding the red text, which basically says you can do a new building that doesn't serve an ag purpose.
So as drafted, you could refit an existing building, like an old barn, and it could be just used as a venue. But if you're going to build a new building, it would have to be something that would be used for both agricultural and event venue.
Yeah, so
I
what
think
you
that's
just
what we
described
talked
that is
about.
scenario 1A.
Are we good on that? Are we in agreement on that?
That is what we talked about, you're correct.
Raj?
Whether we're in agreement on it is,
Oh, okay, all right.
that's what we talked about.
Well, then, I guess we need to determine whether we're in agreement on it.
I'm concerned about it, it's narrowing us down. I still think about the person that wants to come in and we zone off an AS, the 3 to 10 acres, this whole bit. But he's wanting to start a venue business. He's not going to put hay in the building. He's not going to put cattle in the building. It's going to be strictly for a venue. In our definitions, it'd probably be weddings or whatnot. If we don't allow that type of a scenario to take place by making it existing buildings, I think we're gonna cut out a lot of people that wanna invest in Fitchburg.
How many of these would you like to see in Fitchburg, Raj?
How many days?
No, how many of these venues would you like to see in Fitchburg?
Well, that's hard to say. I don't know what the demand would be. If the
Yeah, and
demand,
if I could just piggyback on that, point well taken, Ed. I do think there is probably a supply and demand issue at play here. If folks are doing standalone, again, my experience, if folks are doing standalone event venues, new construction, these are massive investments. So I think there would be a natural market supply and demand. I could be wrong. We could see the rural areas flooded with these if we do a looser interpretation, but just a thought.
Well, I think that supply and demand is one thing, but also I think that location is everything. You're gonna find that it's gonna be limited by some of the requirements on where you locate these. And then as far as long as the land is used for agriculture, I don't think it has to be, farmed by the owner, because a lot of the land is leased for various things for agriculture, as long as it's maintained that way. But it's based on the income of the owner as how much is ag and how much is for the venue. I don't think that's a requirement, but I think Wade's point on the zoning chapter there kind of loosen that up, so that could be done, as far as, the income. But building a new facility and having it look like the barn, or even bring a barn in and reconstruct it, which is commonly done now, I think that would leave some options where it could work but it's gonna take, a lot of requirements, and outside of us, as far as any, as far as the plan commission goes and all that, and meeting all the police and fire and making a safe facility. But uses, I think some of it could be used in agriculture, for some things, and still used as a, an entertainment situation, but not necessarily has to be one or the other, or both, I mean.
Randy?
Who's going to check to see if that new existing building is being used properly? I mean, you store a tractor, you store hay. Suppose it's, you have not a standalone, but an attached facility, you pull in a tractor. Does that define that new existing building that's designed for a venue? Does that meet the requirements? I mean, it seems to be very subjective. I mean, I'm tending to lean in that direction, but I don't know how else you're going to monitor that.
Good question. I mean, there are a lot of things like that
Yeah.
kind of really don't get monitored unless there's a complaint. I mean, it's really kind of complaint driven.
It's on a complaint basis. Most things in city ordinances are driven by a complaint basis.
Yep, and I just want to clarify, that's exactly right, Mark and Ed, that's what we do with conditional uses, and staff doesn't have, obviously, a capacity to go out and proactively monitor every conditional use. So, obviously, if we do want an ag building requirement, that would be clarified in the application, in the allowance of the conditional use, but, once that use is happening, staff won't be going out there to make sure there's a tractor in there or whatever. Yep.
And they shouldn't.
Randy?
Just as a follow-up, then would that not meet what you're describing, Roger? I mean, as an individual that came in and it was a new building and it was strictly for venue, but based on our requirement here, what we're defining, I don't know, I think you'd meet both my criteria. I guess that's what I'm driving at.
Yeah, if you've got it attached and you got a tractor in it,
Yeah.
you know, that defines that scenario. That fills that.
Well,
Well, not just be clear, the tractor needs to be used to
Well,
farm the remaining acreage on the parcel, or the farm, yeah.
yeah, and it's like, where do you draw the line between what looks rustic and what looks brand new? I mean,
Well,
that's gonna be determined by just a visual walkthrough on it, or
well,
I
Yeah.
don't know where you put guidelines on that, or, you know, where you can define it
Yeah.
exactly.
I think
George,
the
that's
planning
probably,
committee,
from staff's perspective, that would be the least of our concerns. You know, we do have some architectural standards for our, some of our rural development that I imagine we would just cut and paste into the conditional use. So, you know, I think we could certainly, that wouldn't be a concern from staff.
Wade, in your scenario 2B, where you address, the new building, how would you reword the other definition that we were just working on to meet this criteria?
Yeah, all we would do, I mean,
Just
again,
put
if
it-
the
would you
committee
just-
likes the idea of,
Existing or new?
correct.
Okay,
And then, but then to clarify, so the building itself, you know, could be new construction, but there still needs to be this idea of a farming aspect to the broader lot. So basically, you know, we need to have the majority of that AS parcel in agricultural use.
oh, that leads me to another question. Let's talk about that. Let's take max 10 acres. Okay, if you're going to put a venue in there, and you're going to have a parking lot, you know, which is going to take up some acre. Let's say you've got a total of, the person buys 10 acres, and he's got a total of 5 acres that he's got light for the building, parking lot, any outbuildings to supplement it, anything to go with that venue as new. You're going to end up with 5 acres out there yet. So you're saying we're going to farm 5 acres? Now, he's bought that farm, or he's bought that land from an existing farmer. Okay, what I'm getting at is 5 acres, to farm 5 acres is a challenge.
Yep, so a couple of scenarios there. Again, maybe let's start with a different scenario. Let's say somebody comes in and buys a 35-acre AX lot or a 40-acre AX lot. And they buy this with the intention of they want to do a rural event venue. And let's, just for the sake of discussion, let's say the committee allows for new construction. So they would, per what I've discussed, they would parcel off that 10 acres for the new construction of the venue. And ideally, you know, let's say it's a 4-acre footprint for that. So basically they're farming, so the 6 on the AS lot and the 30 on the other AS lot, you know, that could still be rented out to the neighboring farmer. So let's say that's scenario A. Scenario B would be someone wants to just buy 10 acres for, to do a new rural event venue. All they have is 10 acres. Again, what we're saying, and I realize this may not be realistic or feasible, but it is what it is. All land under common ownership primarily devoted to an agricultural use. So talking with the zoning administrator, we interpret primarily devoted to agricultural use to be a majority of a parcel, you know, devoted to a rural event venue. So Again, if they just come in, they want 10 acres, 4 acres of the that property is going to a footprint of a rural event venue. Well, if they want to do this, they got to figure out some way to farm that 6 acres.
Or they have to work with the neighbors so that a 6-acre parcel in conjunction with the neighbor's 30-acre parcel might possibly work well, depending on, there may not be any exchange of rent for that land, but it could be farmed together. It's quite common.
Yeah, again, the definition is land under common ownership devoted to ag use, and that's, again, a broad, intentionally broad definition. Yep.
Would you say that 6 acres of apples or 6 acres of asparagus is a lot of apples or a lot of asparagus?
Depends on the frost.
I would say so too. So,
You could make it work.
I mean, we're not just talking about corn and beans here, right?
Exactly.
No.
We look at apple garden, for example. That's a Class A example.
Yeah,
Depends on the soil and the definition, that,
it will work. It will work.
and we can take a look at, the definition of what a farm is too. We had a couple of different options up there. It could be both A and B. It could be, primarily ag, and it has to meet a certain, the statutory dollar amount too. We don't have to choose A or B. It could be A and B.
Well, to that point, Ed, essentially B is what you've described. So B is saying land under common ownership and income requirement. So B is basically, A is a standalone with no income requirement. B incorporates A plus an income requirement.
So if a farmer wanted to build out an old barn as an event venue, parcel it off as 3 acres, keep it under their ownership, farm the rest of the farm, and lease it to an operator, you could do that, right?
To me, that would be scenario 1A. Yep.
So that seems like a pretty reasonable scenario that fits in with what we were talking about at the last meeting.
For an existing farmer.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with,
What about the person that wants to come in and he's not an existing farmer to start with?
Raj, I think once you open that up, because this is not just weddings, this is corporate events, this is all sorts of things that are normally done in the urban service area. And this is exactly why staff didn't want to go down this road months ago, and we pushed to do it. And if we're going to open it wide open, I guarantee you, I'm voting no on this. I mean, I would like to get this done. We have a lot of things that are packaged in here, and we spend all of our time on this venue issue. But there are a lot of things in here that are really supportive of agriculture that I think we'd like to get done and move on with. We got to put this to bed. But if it's going to be wide open, take all comers, if that's what we want to do to our agricultural area, I'm voting no. So, and I don't know how everyone else feels about that, but I would much rather see this be very restrictive. I have no problem with someone taking a historic barn, rehabbing it, or using it for this purpose if it has no other purpose. And even kind of stretching and saying, all right, if you're going to put up a new building, you're going to use it for both agriculture and this. But now if we just want venues all over the place throughout the rural area, to me, that's not the purpose of creating these conditional uses for the agricultural area. The purpose was to allow conditional uses that support agriculture. And this is getting a little far afield from something that supports agriculture. Maybe it doesn't conflict with it, but it doesn't really support it either.
So Ed, what you're saying is that it would be zoned under commercial then? If we just allowed someone to just come in to put up a wedding barn?
Well, that's what other communities have done.
Right.
They have used
We-
commercial zoning,
We're
and
not,
I'm,
we don't zone commercial in ag districts. We don't do it. We can't do
Right.
that.
Right.
If you guys want to allow this type of use, it's going to be ag small.
Right, but weren't you saying that back in our February meeting that the state required a lot of the other barns that were used as wedding barns to be under a commercial zoning?
No, so but you can't do this type of use in ag exclusive. So what people do,
I guess what I'm saying is the zoning would have to change.
right, yep, the AS, yep, correct.
yeah, unless it's already AS. We've got small parcels out there that are already AS. But otherwise, yeah, they've got to take this piece of it out of AX, because by state statute, you can't have this in AX.
Yeah, that part I get, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, and George, basically, the way other places handle this is the way we're proposing to handle it, meaning call it what it is. It's a commercial business use. And because of that, zone it, create a new lot, and rezone it to a ag small. Other places rezone it to like, they have like ag business districts, they have commercial districts, but Fitchburg does not have that. And we're not gonna create a new zoning district to allow one use. It's against all our policies, so hence the ag small proposal.
Just so I'm clear, we're talking about buildings that are, to fit this type of agricultural tourism, whatever you want to call it, we're going to limit ourselves to existing buildings for that purpose? Is that right?
What Wade has drafted would allow a new building that is also being built for agricultural purposes.
Okay,
To
I
be
guess I could get
built.
around that. I could get around that.
And I can support
Yeah, I can get around that,
I can support that.
yeah.
What do you guys think?
You can create it many ways, you know, by moving a barn or taking parts off of an old barn and building a new one. Because if you're gonna make it, you know, safe, you almost have to go right to the timbers on it.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just take an old barn and just
It's almost
change
a new
it.
building by the time it's done.
Well, you can, but you have a good point. It's a lot of work, and Mary Ann's building is a classic example of that. A lot of work, a lot of money, but you can do it. Beautiful job, but you
Yep.
can do
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Yep.
I think there's another thing in here. There's another in here I like, is that existing buildings with similar rustic architectural style. That's important for anybody coming in to build this building for both uses.
And they're still gonna have to fall under the conditional, whatever conditions the plan commission, Ag and Rural puts on it, fire department puts on it, you know. It's not gonna be an easy accomplishment.
Well, even location, I mean, it's not,
And
They're not gonna
something
pop
that we
up
have to, we talked about the small parcel, and Wade has been very supportive of this, is as we move forward, you're gonna see more and more of the vegetable, smaller use parcels being used for farm markets and things as that, and Wade has said that for, well, ever since he's been here, that is because of our location, is a potential, and you're beginning to see it more and more. Location, because we're so close.
especially close to the urban.
Yep.
So Wade, I think, I mean, your definition is intending to state that a new building should be of a similar rustic architectural style, correct? But I'm not sure that it really reads that way.
No, good point. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, I'm assuming if it's an ag building, it's gonna, it's gonna meet snuff in terms of, but I see what you're getting at. So we just want, so even if it's an ag building, like there's a lot of pole barns that are ag buildings, we're saying that's not okay for a building that could house a rural event venue and be an ag building?
No, it would have to be, Wade, it would have to be built to a different code than egg standards. So if that was your purpose.
So I guess, yeah, so I think we would probably just say, I think that would be a condition of use.
You bet it would be.
Yeah, not in the, I don't think we need that in the definition.
I agree with you
but-
100%. And we have an excellent building department here that, if given the parameters they can work in, you won't have a problem with it. But the only thing is that we have to define at least a little bit in there that it would have to fit, I'm not sure how to word it. The standards would have to match the use.
Right, right.
So
But wait,
if
are we talking, I mean, are we talking about building codes, or are we talking about aesthetic visual appearance, or are we talking about both?
Both.
Okay,
Because for example, your ag buildings are 9 foot on centers. Your commercials are 4 foot on center. Same building. Same building, same guy building it. Clary Building, for example. It's either 4 or 6, but it's a different standard, depending on what your use is going to be.
just to clarify, so like as an example, I think we all know the buildings that Durfers owned, or maybe they don't own them anymore, that we've had our annual listing sessions in the past few years.
Yep.
So assuming those buildings are up to code for these types of gatherings, are we also saying we want a nicer looking architectural style as well? Or are we okay with the way that building looks?
I think you mentioned it there, in other words, my vision of what you're saying is it meets the architectural style of the surrounding grounds,
Right.
which you have in that definition. I'm looking at the aesthetic end of it to meet the requirement.
So even if it's an existing building?
If it's an existing building, of course, you can't use the word assume, but I would think that it's already got the agricultural
Right.
aesthetic look. In a barn.
Yeah.
You're thinking a barn.
So-
But I'm thinking about a person comes in and puts a new one up, it's got to meet the same
Yeah, I
standards
agree
around
with-
there.
Yeah, I
That's
agree
what
with you.
yeah.
That if it's gonna be a new building, we want it to meet these architectural standards.
Right.
If it's reuse of an existing building that's already there.
Well, then you gotta
I'm
go
not
to
sure if
code.
we're concerned about that.
Then you got to go to building code,
Yeah, you have building code either way,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
I mean, can we word it in
understand.
a way
Okay.
that the architectural standards apply in the event that it's a new building?
Got it, yep.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, sure, dump it on plan commission.
There you go.
I didn't mean that.
There you go.
So I guess I'm starting to hear maybe a little bit of a consensus. So there's probably a couple ways we could handle this. We could, make a motion to, again, whenever the committee is ready, I'm not pushing, I'm just kind of talking process here. You could make a motion to approve the definition, and then make a separate motion to talk about the farm options, which we've not discussed yet. Or we can, if there is a general consensus on this definition, we could start talking about farm options, and then you could make one motion with definition of rural event venue and the desired farm option.
So if you just, to clarify this, if you have an existing or new agricultural building or an existing building, and then state, maybe just reword it so that you state that if it's a new building, it will be of a similar rustic architectural style.
Rural rustic.
Yeah,
Yep, got it.
I think we're on the same page, so we could, if we put it in the motion, you could leave
Yeah.
the drafting to you on that?
Yeah, I would prefer to do that because I don't, with these types of complex issues, I don't like the wordsmith in meetings because there's often things we don't think of and then we have, so yeah, if you guys trust me, I know exactly what you're saying and I will craft something that reflects what you're saying. What we can also do is if you, give me some general direction today and make motions and approve motions, I certainly can send out things in the next couple of weeks, just so folks can see what they are, and then if there are issues, we can discuss, but I understand what you guys are asking for, so.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I think we're okay just having you wordsmith it, Wade.
Yeah, like I said, similar rural rustic architecture is some wording that would be good.
Got it.
So, okay, I think we're good there. And so then the other question was the definition of a farm.
So do you want to do those all in a same motion, Ed? In
Well,
terms of-
if we're in agreement on these things, maybe we can just have one motion on this entire conditional use issue, rather
for
than
me.
taking them separately.
Yep, so again, so that's great, you guys. I think there's a general consensus on the definition. So now I think the remaining question again would be, what is the definition of a farm? And these are the two options that I'm giving the committee, so.
And it could be both.
Yeah, I mean, if it's both, it's B.
I prefer option A myself. I don't like B. We had to
Yeah.
do that with the county. The client I was working for, I had to submit all their taxes for 3 years. You got that security issue of that. Where's that information end up? Who's in charge of that information? We had to submit that to Dane County zoning. None of us felt very comfortable about doing that. I just don't like it.
I agree, I don't like it. I'd like to stay with the simple one, A. Well, let's go back to our 3 to 5 acres that we're gonna put apple trees on or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. A makes-
You're talking $6,000 to make it a definition. I think we're really backing ourselves in the wrong way on that, if we take that.
Okay.
And another thought too is, obviously if people do like B, staff would require that as a submittal when we issue the permit, but we wouldn't ask for that every year. It's just not something we would do, so.
It sounds like, I think the consensus is to just go with A.
Yep.
Simple and more flexible.
Okay.
Okay,
And then I would just request a little wordsmithing under where you have on page 7A, put in the minimum lot size.
hold on, are you in the memo, Ed?
Yes, I'm in your memo.
Yeah, let me swap screens here. 'Cause yeah, that's the next, I wanted to turn to all the stuff in the memo just to make sure.
Yeah, because this is
'Cause
what I
that's-
think what we're
that's the
actually
literal
voting
stuff
on.
right there,
Yeah.
so, yep. All right, 1 second.
Page A, kind of in the middle there, page 7. Just kind of nail down this size issue.
Yeah, so, okay, so, yep, so again, just to clarify, this is the memo we've seen many times here, so change 2. This, I believe, is exactly what, well, I will wordsmith the architectural wording, but that's as
Right.
we've discussed. And then, yeah, now we're moving into conditions.
So under condition A, we'd have a minimum of 3 acres and a maximum of 10 acres if a new lot is to be created. I would just
Sure.
like to leave that open, so if you got a property that's already zoned AS, you don't have to go out and subdivide it.
Yep. Yep, that makes sense. And then just to clarify too, actually the wording I have in there, under condition A is the wording for farm, is the wording that the commission, decided on, so that would remain as well.
Where is
I guess-
that? Where is that?
So all land under common ownership that is primarily devoted to ag use, in parentheses there. That's,
Which
that's the farm
page?
definition that I understand the committee to be
Which-
agreeable to.
Which page is that, Wade?
7 of the packet,
Okay,
should be up on the screen there too. Now,
which,
the only other thing I changed from this condition use per the direction at the last meeting was under B. I understood, again, I think, especially now that we're tying it back into a farm use, I think this condition becomes less important. But really, this condition was trying to kind of make sure it still looked like a farm, maybe even when it wasn't, with this idea of a buffer. Just 1 second here.
Well, that would be still applicable then if a new building were going up.
Yeah, and I guess what I did add for my understanding of committee direction was this last sentence on condition B was that it may be waived based on the discretion of the plan commission.
yep, I don't have a problem with that. We had talked about different numbers on the, you've got 200 in there, we talked about 300 or 500. 300 is a common number.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like existing barns, maybe that are closer to the, I don't know, what, 200 was, I saw that a couple times in other case studies, so I just went with that.
Okay,
But I think, again, the last sentence would give the reviewing body's ability to waive this. And then if we see a couple of these come in over the next 10 years and the buffer is way off, we can certainly
well, you,
tweak that then too.
instead of, your last sentence, instead of the ability to waive it or enhance it,
You mean make it bigger?
if the reforming body looked at it and found that, yeah, 200 was what the ordinance said, but we think it ought to be 5.
Yeah, Mark, modified, that word, that's what that means to me. You could make it,
Well,
lesser, you
modified
could
or
make it
waived,
bigger, or you could waive it altogether.
That isn't my interpretation of that, so.
Oh, okay, well, I can clarify.
I've got a question on E. Increase in traffic generated at venue shall not create nuisance. How I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but how does one identify that, and under what grounds? Do the police department or traffic people make an issue there, or how's that identified?
Which one,
I mean,
Roger?
I think,
E. The increase.
I think what would probably happen, so yeah, that's letter E, if people can read that. I think what would probably happen, Roger, is in our, we require a site plan and, a real detailed application, number of events, size of events. So I think we would get a lot of that detail then, and then just ensure that whatever we allow out there to the best of our ability doesn't create a nuisance. I mean, I think it's inevitable. There will be increased traffic, but how do we manage that in the approval process? And then I think, to our earlier discussions, I think a lot of times with these venues, there's, people take buses out there. They're not
Sure.
necessarily driving 50 cars, but, 50 people are riding in a bus out there and back. So I think we have ways to manage that.
Okay, good.
I have a question and concern about number 2, the wording in number 2.
Number two, or is it which number?
2A.
Where, Mark?
2A,
I'm sorry, what number letter?
2A.
So where are you on page 7?
Yep,
Okay.
Regarding
So the-
wind towers and solar
Yep.
panels? Okay. up on the permitted uses. Is
I'm
where
sorry.
Mark is,
Oh, there.
up on the top of
Well,
page
Okay,
7.
we did approve those already, though,
Okay.
months ago.
My concern of that is, was then and is still, is the term to serve a single farm. Because Wade, when you put up solar panels on your house or your farm that you own, if you are, if there's not enough draw at Wade's house, the balance of the power goes out onto the grid. And most of them are created that way. And because of that option, that is a standard option, you are against the ordinance.
So you're not talking like big solar farms, you're talking about something like just a couple panels on somebody's farm that would create excess
If there is
energy
an
that would be
excess,
sold?
if there is an excess, if you basically it goes to the grid and then you either receive a credit or a check, one or the other. So if you're receiving a check so that you're producing more than what your house uses, your house is in violation of the ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, if the committee wants to, I can go back and tweak that language. I think what we're really trying to be clear is, we're not talking about the large scale O'Brien solar farm type stuff. But yeah, if the committee wants me to clarify that, I can work on that language.
I mean, maybe you could say intended to serve. So it's clear that, I mean, it's not a
wiggle
big
room.
deal if some of it's getting sold back.
Some of it's some wiggle room, because everybody, I mean, technically, you can't put solar in if it's just, unless you're off the grid and you're using it yourself
Yeah,
by this wording.
yeah.
And nobody's gonna do that, so if we wanna promote that type of stuff, which I think most everybody in here does, then we gotta be careful with our wordings.
Sure, okay.
Are there other items that anyone wanted
all I
to
had.
discuss?
That's all I had marked.
Are we at a point, did you have a recommended motion for, well, Wade, I don't think you did.
I think we could probably, just give me a second, Ed. I think we can probably, I think everything that we've discussed and decided upon is contained in the memo. Let me just double check. I think the motion could be as simple as a motion to recommend to the plan commission changes as contained in the staff memo and as discussed, something like that. So yeah, rural event venue, if people just want to read through, I guess there would be as contained in the staff memo, with additional wording regarding agricultural building, architectural standards. But other than that, I believe it's the definition that the committee likes. Are people seeing that on the screen there?
I can deal with that.
Yep.
Okay. So, and then again, I think everything we've talked about in terms of conditions, and specifically the farm definition is contained in the memo. Again, if I can change the modified under the buffer requirement, if that's not clear to people. And then I can also work on the solar to serve a single farm, as Mark just talked about, so. Yeah, it's pretty much all in the memo, the gist of everything.
So if we had a motion to approve the agricultural accessory / related uses in city agricultural zoning districts per the staff memo, with changes as discussed at the meeting.
I think we're good.
No, I can't. I need someone to move it. Unless there's any other discussion.
I'm good with that.
Scott, do you have anything? You're always quiet.
Soaking it all in, Ed. But no, I agree with, I like the direction we're going, and I'm happy with everything we're talking about. So the only question that I was going to consider asking, but not to draw this out any longer than it already has been drawn out, but in regards to making everybody more comfortable with not having the concern of these things popping up like quick trips, can we put anything in the language that says a maximum number of these venues, or is that a bad idea?
Yeah, I don't know the legality of that, Scott. I can look into that. I'm not aware of doing that in any, I've been at this about 15 years and can't remember a scenario where I've seen that with any land uses.
Right.
I
don't think it's that big of a concern because I don't think that will happen, but I was just for more of a peace of mind because, I mean, I know over a year and a half ago when I was looking at wedding venues, it was 5-year waiting list if you wanted to get married in a barn. So I don't think that's an issue. So it was just a question I thought I'd ask.
The huge amount of money, the financial outlay that a person's gonna have to do it is probably gonna restrict the number of them, because you're talking some pretty good dollars.
So I'll make the motion. But Ed, you can fill in the blank, or Wade can fill in the blank, or Ed can fill in the blank.
Was that a second? Mark, did you move it?
No, Scott did.
Scott moved it,
He moved it,
Scott, okay.
I'll second it. Yeah.
and a second from Randy. All right, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes unanimously. Thanks, Wade. Good work on this. It's been a
Oh,
long
I
haul.
appreciate the
Good
committee's
work to
patience, and
everyone
I
on
mean,
this.
in retrospect, this was a complicated issue. I think the committee took its time. You thought it through. I think from a staff perspective, this is a good option moving forward. So thank you for your time and effort as well.
Thank you, Wade.
Great. Next item on the agenda is purchase of development rights. This had been tabled from a prior meeting. I think what we'll probably do is start with the staff report. I mean, we've all had a chance to read this. There's an awful lot that would need to be done to accomplish this. Wade, maybe want to give us a kind of a brief summary, and we can talk about whether we want to proceed or not.
Yep. And just in terms of a time check, there is a meeting. It's only 5:30. I think there's a plan commission meeting at 6:30, so we should wrap up probably a little bit after 6, but I think we're in pretty good shape. So yeah, again, this has been on the committee interest. I think the past few years, I think there's been some general talk about it. I believe probably late maybe the November meeting, I kind of gave you a overview of what a program would entail, generally speaking, in terms of, kind of nuts and bolts. So this is more of a examination of commitment in terms of time and resources, for the city. And just so folks know, prior to me coming to Fitchburg, I did develop a program in Rock County, just south of here, some really good farmland down there. The program was really thorough, just like we experienced with the rural event venue. Anytime you want to do a good job with any land use thing, it takes time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of stakeholders. So this program, if it were to happen in the city, would be no different. And again, given the unique dynamics of the city that we've discussed, i.e. the fact that we're a city, I think this kind of program would take on even more pronounced importance and just a level of thoroughness that, would certainly need to be addressed. So again, I'm just providing estimates and information based on my experience in developing a program, but also my experience with Fitchburg's unique land use dynamics. So, I would think in terms of, and I've broken it out into formation of a program, literally creating something, and then administration of the program once something's created. So in terms of, forming it, just like a comp plan process, just like we developed our egg plan, I'm envisioning a year plus of planning to develop the program. Major tasks would be, again, talking formation, basically we would need authorization to proceed. I don't know it, just without doing a lot of in-depth research on this, I don't know if that would come from our council or our plan commission or both. Probably,
Probably
yeah,
both.
I don't know. I can certainly look into that if the committee wants me to, but there would need to be some, in my opinion, some authority from above this committee to start down this path. And then, just like we do with other projects of this importance, planning projects, we would form an ad hoc committee. That's basically a committee designed to, so this A committee, you guys are permanent. Ad hocs are basically formed to address certain issues. And usually I think their time frame is about a year. They can go beyond that, but point being, ad hoc means a temporary committee for a specific project. Now, my understanding is ad hoc committees are mayoral appointees. I don't know if council has to approve them or not, but obviously there would be some other folks involved in forming that committee as well. And then, in terms of tasks, once a committee is formed, there's a lot that committee would do. Again, I base this on my experience with developing a previous program. Should this happen, I envision someone like me being kind of the staff liaison to the committee, the ad hoc committee. So first step, committee engagement, just letting people know what's going on. Various outreach, newspaper articles, maybe a kickoff information session, Q&A session, that kind of thing. And then the committee would really get to work on developing the program. So first step, in my opinion, is saying, okay, we got our rural lands. Well, in our rural lands, which parcels are eligible to apply? And that eligibility criteria could take a lot of different forms, would again entail substantial work. So once you come up with that criteria, then you do a GIS exercise to identify, a mapping exercise to identify those parcels that are eligible for the program. And then basically figure, okay, once you have your eligible parcels, how are you prioritizing those parcels for acquisition? Meaning, which parcels will give this city the most bang for its buck in terms of goals of this program. So for that, I use the term priority easement acquisition areas. So what that means is, again, not every parcel in the city will be eligible, and not every parcel in the city will be a priority to acquire. Those will be two tiers of mapping that I envision the committee being engaged in. Once we do that, I learned long ago, you come up with a vision, you come up with a plan, and then you figure out how to fund it. It's a lot easier to sell someone, to get funding once you have a vision that you can sell to people. So, once you come up with that basic kind of program scenario, program plan, you need to figure out how this thing's going to get funded. And as I mentioned years ago when I developed this program, there was two sources of funding. There was a state funding source and a federal funding source, and each one of those would cover 50% of an easement acquisition. So a local government, i.e. a county or a city, could apply to both of those sources and get an easement fully funded and not have to spend any of their own money to acquire. To my knowledge, the state program is still on the books, but it hasn't been funded in 10 years. So there's no money there. The federal program, I believe that's also been relatively defunded. And with the new administration, that may come back. But another important point there is both of those funding sources were competitive. You were competing statewide against other applicants. So in my opinion, if this program were to happen in the city, I think the city would, generally speaking, be on the hook to fund our own easement acquisitions. Certainly there could be some smaller grants out there, but probably drops in the bucket. And then then letter G, we're just talking just like any other program that requires administrative paperwork, our zoning permits. There would be all sorts of paperwork involved, application. How do we evaluate the applications? Once we figure out the applications we like in terms of easements. There is a real estate document called a purchase and sale agreement, which the city would enter into with an applicant that we want to buy an easement from. So that template would need to be created. Appraisal RFPs, we need to get the property appraised. So how do we advertise for appraisers? And then normally you need to also get the appraisal reviewed. So it's basically a double appraisal. Somebody comes in after the appraisal, another appraiser comes in and says, okay, this guy did it right. I agree with his value, because easements they're a kind of a subjective appraisal methodology. So you need to have someone come in and confirm. And then once we get that, appraised, reviewed, we would need a literal document, an easement document, to outline the terms of what the city is acquiring, what are the terms of the easement. And then there's something called baseline documentation, which basically means if a landowner is saying, I will not develop this property and not do certain other things, there needs to be a level of documentation that says, when the city acquired the easement, it looked like this. And then, every 5 years or 10 years, the city will need to monitor that easement to make sure that the terms of that easement are being upheld. Now, I guess the good news here is I created all these forms, so I have all these templates, should the city want to, again, go down this path. But just point being is there's a lot of paperwork involved in a program development. And then I think just kind of the capper here is letter H. This would be just like we have an ag plan, just like we have our comp plan. I think it's really nice to have just what I'll call a program manual, a very short document that outlines everything that went into program development. And then again, I think a program of this magnitude would probably necessitate a council adoption of that sort of a plan or a manual. Then I guess we're getting into administration. So that's part B of this equation. Once we have something developed, there needs to be administration of the developed program. So, again, what I've done and did in the past with a similar program is basically an annual application cycle, meaning, we open the application cycle, we close it, we review applications, we make acquisition. Staff would probably make a recommendation to this committee. Then I would envision, 1 or 2 committee meetings per year to review those applications and make a recommendation to Plan Commission and or Council. And then I envision Plan Commission weighing in on this. Again, the Ag Committee is an advisory body to the Plan Commission. So I think, going up the food chain, the Plan Commission would want to weigh in on those application recommendations as well. And then ultimately, Council would have the final authority to approve or deny acquisition decisions. And once those decisions are made, staff would work with landowners and appraisers to acquire and enforce the easements. And again, that acquisition and enforcement would entail all those steps I just discussed. So all these, basically from the purchase and sale agreement on, that's the start of the acquisition process. So, yeah, so I mean, fair, again, certainly there probably could be shortcuts here in program development and administration, but having developed a program, these are the things I would recommend should the city want to develop a program. And then, as it relates to time commitments, these are really just ballpark estimates. I think what I've relayed, I think you guys understand that it's, again, a fair amount of work involved. I would envision maybe a third to a quarter of an FTE, someone like me, to get the program formed. That'd be a major commitment of mine over a year plus. And then obviously we get an intern every year. I would envision relying on that person to do a lot of the, some of the base work to help the program get formed. And then, I think in terms of that ad hoc committee I mentioned, maybe again, if we're talking a year process, I could see, let's just say 8 to 12 meetings, over a year. Those are heavy duty meetings, a lot of information being discussed at those. So, we'd be talking a couple hours plus for those types of meetings. And then just minor point, I do believe ad hoc committees, I take that back. I don't think we do per diems for ad hoc committees, so I don't think there'd be any cost, literal cost to the city to develop an ad hoc committee. And then, so that's just formation, once the thing's developed. We're talking administration, again, that's a fair amount of workload. I'm just making an assumption of maybe 2 to 3 acquisitions a year. Maybe it's less. I don't think it's more than that. And then if we are looking at utilizing non-city funding sources, i.e. grants, there would be a percentage of staff time that, would be required to prepare and submit grant applications. And for anyone that's ever submitted a grant application, those are work, those take time, especially if you want to be competitive and get money. And then, yeah, again, I would, so that would be somebody like me doing that work. And then I would envision, again, relying on interns annually to help out with that wet workload. Maybe half their workload every year is devoted to supporting the program. And then again, as it relates to the committees, we're talking a couple meetings a year of the Ag Committee, maybe 2+ meetings. Again, Plan Commission, probably 1 meeting a year, a couple hours, and then council meeting, again, probably once a year, a couple hours. And then, where the rubber hits the road with costs, again, I can't give you guys specific, numbers, but just, I guess, understand that it would be a percentage of staff salary that goes towards this program. So that would be a cost to formulate and both administer. And then, literally acquiring the easements, again, depending on how many we acquire and what the appraisals come in at, I would envision conservatively hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, maybe unconservatively millions of dollars per year. Again, depending on cost of easements and amount of easements acquired. And then, of course, we do have to also pay for appraisals and appraisal reviews. And I can't recall offhand how much those cost, but maybe, I don't know, if we're talking $10,000, total as maybe a year cost, but that would be an additional cost as well. So again, those are just estimates, a lot of variables within everything I just discussed, but hopefully that gives the committee a sense of, what a program like this could look in terms of workload, formation and administration. So.
Okay, thanks, Wade. Let's open this up for discussion. Is this, someone want to make an argument that this is something that we may want to pursue?
Well, I've been a proponent of it for years because I hope we don't end up ruining all of the city of Fitchburg with development. And I say that quite honestly. Because the one-time crop of a house doesn't do much for the rest of the rural land. And we've just by Wade coming up with a format like this is even if we don't proceed at this point in time, we've accomplished something by bringing it to this committee for some review. I know that a form of this was talked about before, the committee got a kind of a sour taste. At least that's how I would describe the references back to it.
Yeah, we talked about a transfer system rather than a purchase system.
Right.
And that did not have a lot of support.
And bottom line is, what do you want your grandchildren who live in the same house you do now, if you're lucky? What do you want them, what quality of life do you want them to have? And if it's wall-to-wall houses, isn't much quality there. That's my 2 cents. At least we've began a process. if we table this and look at it in a year from now, I don't have a problem with that. But at least we've moved it into some formality. But if we never start, you'll never get there. If you say, oh, it can't be done, well, then you're never gonna go there.
I got a question for Wade, or a couple questions. Do you have any estimate of how large this program was in Rock County? Just a rough idea of how much it was used in Rock County?
Yeah, so I mean, we developed a countywide program. We worked with, you got city of Janesville down there, city of Beloit, and all the towns and villages, and they were obviously concerned that, the county would build a wall around them and they couldn't grow. So we, a lot of work with that to come up with a really solid program that identified, again, geographically where those target acquisition areas would be. And then literally, George, so I spent, it's a year plus developing that program. And I think I started the first year of the application cycle, and we had made recommendations, approved acquisitions. Now I was just starting to work with the landowners, and then I got the Fitchburg job. So I'm trying to remember, I believe I was working with 4 applicants, probably let's say maybe 400 acres total. My understanding is those acquisitions were followed through with. There were a couple more years of acquisitions, and then those funding sources that I mentioned, those went away. And I think the county did try to use some of their money for a couple of years, but they just couldn't support it with their funds. So in terms of scale, we were talking a countywide program, a couple hundred acres every year was a goal. But literally our easement acquisition areas, the place we would target, they were thousands of acres. I can send you the map. It's a real nice map visual. Does that answer your question? Is that in terms of size?
Yeah, and then what are some of the requirements on the easements that are put on that land?
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're saying is the property under easement shall be used for agriculture as we've kind of just discussed, into perpetuity, meaning no houses, no subdivisions, no city or village annexation. Certainly within those easements, we would make allowances for development that was related to agriculture. So, like something like development related to support and enhance agriculture is allowed. But but the landowner essentially had, let's say they had a 200-acre property. If they just wanted to put 100 acres into easement, they could, and then if the 100 acres would remain, the other 100 would remain out of easement, they could still develop that or whatever. But again, that gets to the point of, being real strategic about where you're putting your resources.
Right.
Because quite honestly, and in the way we developed the county program and the way we developed a city program could be developed, a few strategically placed easements could really discourage a lot of growth potential. You don't have to protect everything with an easement to protect everything, if you know what I mean. So yeah.
Well, a lot of that requirement would be presented by a committee, decisions on the ad hoc committee that would determine what.
Everything all the steps I've discussed, that's, just like I work with you guys, I come with ideas. We do we do the work, and then you guys tell me this is a good idea or this isn't a good idea. And then if it's a good idea, we approve it and move to the next step. If it's not a good idea, I go back and fix it and then come back. So yeah, the committee would be the decision makers, but staff would be doing all the legwork and all the mapping and coming up with ideas and, yeah, so.
Raj?
Wade, with this purchase of developmental rights versus our current zoning, where do those two overlap, or where has one got advantage of it? Our AX zoning is quite specific,
Yeah.
and far as, monitoring development. Plus, we've got a pretty strong comprehensive plan that tells us where we want to be as far as land preservation.
Yeah.
Where do they come together?
Yeah, I think you've got two things working for you, and you mentioned them both, but I'll just elaborate on them. I think first and foremost is your comp plan, and more specifically in the comp plan, your future urban development areas. If a city or this city adheres to that vision over the next 50 years, you will protect farmland. Similarly, your zone, so the comp plan is kind of the 30,000 foot philosophical level, and then the zoning is actually, the literal land use. Obviously, as we see, yeah, you have AX zoning, but we also have RRDC. We have rural event venues that we've been discussing. So there's segments of those ag lands that will get developed. That's the city's made a decision that that's okay. But I think, to Mark's point, and I guess I would make the same point, and I have seen it happen here, and I think it will continue to happen, is a plan is just that, it's a plan. So what's a future urban development area now will potentially be developed, and then new future urban development areas will be identified. Or, current future urban development areas can be abandoned, and new future urban development areas can be identified in the comp plan. So what an easement does is it offers you protection into perpetuity. And perpetuity is not a legal term, but it means forever. Easements can be overturned, but it's incredibly rare and doesn't normally happen. So again, to Mark's point, as the city continues to grow, and if the city wants to continue to grow population-wise, and there will be some building up to accommodate that population, but there also will be building out, converting farmland. You are going to see farmland loss. That's inevitable. But if there's a adherence to the comp plan and adherence to the zoning, and when the plan changes, it will, if there's a consciousness of continuing to protect farmland, the city will be in good shape. If the city decides it wants to go a different direction, 50 years from now, you could have suburban neighborhoods down to Oregon, so.
Ed, would we be smart to maybe take some time and really look into this, and with the idea that maybe we go ahead and put it on the books, knowing that it may or may not be used right now, but it's there for future? Is that too dangerous of a move for somebody to jump on it too soon, or do something we wouldn't want them to do?
A couple thoughts there. I think in terms of the city being, or this committee, or being proactive or progressive, or whatever the term you want to use, that could make sense. I think one thing to think about there is the level of resource and staff commitment for something to get on the books versus something to actually be used. Not to cry you guys a river, but I'm staying busy. This would add to that, and I'd be happy to do it if that's what I'm told to do, but I think that's a consideration. I think one thing to think about, and I know we just updated our comp plan, but what you just described, I would see as maybe a concurrent process to an update or an amendment to a comp plan. Because I think you're really talking about a lot of the same things. So, so the idea would be if you're amending FUDAs, future urban development areas, some of that work in developing a PDR program could kind of be, you could kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. So, I guess if you're talking developing a PDR program in the next year, just to get on the books, I'd be a little hesitant, just like probably from just a staff workload perspective. You're talking the same thing as maybe concurrent to a comp plan update. I could see that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, in other words, what you're saying is let's use the comp plan to make it viable for future use.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think these are development and preservation are they're intertwined. So if comp plan, amendment is really about development, I think that's a good time to really talk about preservation as well. And not just preservation on a map, but tools to preserve, i.e. a PDR program. That being said, if there's, and just so you guys know, I mean, the PDR program I developed in Rock County was probably one of the coolest things I've done as a professional. I really enjoyed it. I felt like it was a really good product that, if it would have been maintained with funding, could really make a difference in terms of good land use in Rock County. I don't necessarily like doing things again that I've done before, but I think a project like that with Fitchburg would be equally exciting from a staff perspective, and also, if done right, meaningful. So, one other option would be, we do get an intern every year. If there's little bits of a little pieces of research or whatever it might be that the committee wants this department to undertake, or if there's things I can think of that might help set the stage if and when a PDR program might happen as part of a comp plan update, we can certainly start, we can talk about that. Maybe more of an incremental approach. And then 5 years from now, maybe we've got a few pieces that, we could start really talking about seriously. I don't know exactly what that would look like, but yeah, that could be an option.
Wade, one of the things that concerned me when we did the comp plan the last time, all of the questions were focused, and I brought this up to you guys, all of the questions were focused is how do we develop? There was very little, there was some, but there was very little focus on how do we not develop. And if we don't start a program like this now, my point is I don't have a problem with being patient. I'm a patient individual, but I never forget much of anything. And when we're doing that again, I don't want to see us go down that road again where we don't give the citizens that option. And they did not, they had very little of that option last time.
Yeah, I'm glad you said there was some, because there were questions on farming and agriculture and local food systems. But you're right, it was, given the fact that we're a city, if we're a town or a county, that the development preservation scenario is flipped, but we're a city. And I think cities grow, that's what they do. If they want to.
That's a choice.
If they want to live. But the real question is at what level do we grow?
That's a choice.
And, I think there was some options in there and to your, we were directed to do that update very quickly. It was a lot of work in a short amount of time. And if I had my way, I think we would have maybe slowed down. Obviously, it wasn't my decision, but point taken. I understand. I would agree.
So I don't have a problem with, that's why I say we've accomplished something by getting it on this agenda and getting it started. And when I say started, if we table it for a year, I have no problem with that. And I understand our budget, the city budget in the next 2 years is going to be so tight that this is probably not the time to do that. But if you never plant a seed, you will never reap a crop.
Yeah, and just one other thought on the whole, a program and if done correctly and strategically, and what you would do, what you do is you create stability, long-term stability for farming operations. And then by doing that, you could also, I'm not saying what happened the year after the program starts or even 5 years after, but then I think, Mark, just like you mentioned, people are starting to think about, smaller plots for local food. I think what you would start to see is a real understanding of, Fitchburg has this ag area that is never going to develop. And because of that, I think you could potentially see some, we talk about the ag plan and the FAR, the bike route. I mean, I think you could see some potentially unique agricultural enterprises take place in that area that, again, would really enhance not just farming, but like the city as this really cool juxtaposition of farming and development. So, and, creating identity and economic development and all that. So yeah, there's a lot of upside to exploring a program like this.
Well, Wade, you mentioned that a city does develop. I have the unique perspective of being here. I was one of the few that's left here when we became a city. So I know what the vision was of the people who drove that, because I was one of them. And many of them would be pretty unimpressed with what we've done with it. But growth is a choice. And if the planners remember to look north when they're planning,
Wait, Mark, not planners, policymakers.
both.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have our
You know
Healthy Neighborhoods
exactly
Initiative,
what I
we're
mean.
talking about infill, we're talking about redeveloping neighborhoods. I agree with you 100%.
You understand. So given that, I'll make the motion, we table this for what period of time? I second. For what period of time, is my question.
Year?
That's up for discussion with the committee.
Yeah.
Do we want to go ahead with that? I mean, we've got about 5 minutes we'd like to get out. I have not heard from Randy, or I don't know if Scott's still here. Scott had to leave? Okay. I mean, I guess, do you want to hold off on the motion for
Yeah,
just a second?
I'm okay with that.
The crux of this is whether or not we want to establish an urban growth boundary. Whether or not we want to. And then the next thing is where. That's going to be extremely difficult. Not that it isn't worth doing, because I'm with you, Mark. I think it is. But, Randy, what is your sense on council? I'm sure this really hasn't been discussed, but just your general sense as to whether there is any political will to create an I mean, if you have an urban growth boundary, as Wade said, you can either maintain it with a comprehensive planning process, because we don't have anyone annexing into us like someone else might be who would use PDR, or we would use PDR to protect ourselves from future councils. That's what we're talking about. But I mean, is there political will to establish an urban growth boundary?
Well, there very well could be, but, and this is a new concept to me, but I think Mark mentioned it earlier. I mean, the funding is going to be a big issue. And as we all know, or I think everybody knows, it's just going to be more and more difficult in the years to come, especially picking up the town of Madison in 2022. So it's one thing to establish, but then to fund it, at least from a local municipality. I mean, I know, Wade, you had mentioned county or Rock County itself. Was Jaysville Beloit, did they fund any of the program? Maybe you mentioned it, I just didn't remember.
No, it was, again, initially the program was premised on the idea of you could go to the state and the feds to get 50% of the funding from each of them, and then you could get it fully funded and not have to put any county money in it.
Yeah.
But no, when that money went away, like, cities and villages had no interest in supporting that. So it was like, just like it'd be Dane County money for a Dane County program, it was Rock County money, not Janesville or Beloit or anybody else.
Sure, and you work for the city of Janesville, or did you work for the county?
Oh, I work for the county.
Oh, you county, okay, all right.
Yeah, yeah.
I understand.
So I guess, yeah, I guess the short answer would be the entity that develops the program, if they can't find outside funding sources, they are on the hook to fund. So
But
if we develop a program and we can't find state or federal funds, city taxpayer dollars would fund.
Sure, I'm assuming we're not limited to just Fitchburg dollars.
Right, but I'm just saying there's nothing out there right now. I mean,
Correct.
years ago, there was county grants, or there was state grants, there was federal grants. Those have both gone away.
Yep,
There could be some, like I said, if I do a lot more research, I'm sure there's maybe some philanthropic foundations that we could that might fund these kinds of things. There could be, but I'm just not aware of funding sources like there were substantial sources 10 years ago.
sure, but there's nothing to prevent us from pursuing those. I mean, as far as maybe a county or reestablishing it again, or state, or.
Well, I mean, the state reestablished, Randy, the programs are defunded. So the state program it's in state statute as a program, but there's no money in it. So there's nothing to apply to.
No, I fully understand that, just like here, there's no funding either, but I mean, it's not to say if there's no funding, there's no funding, there's no funding. If you don't pursue it, or push it from a county or a state for somebody to fund it, I mean, you don't believe that that's even a viable option?
Oh, are you saying like the city would lobby the state to try to?
Sure, yeah.
Sure, no, that could, I guess I
Yeah.
was misunderstanding. Yeah, that could be. I mean, I just so you know, Randy, so the program was developed under Jim Doyle, the state program. It was defunded under Walker soon after he came into office.
Sure,
I know there's been a ton of lobbying on both. There was a ton of lobbying to get it formed from some big players in the ag industry, and then there was a ton of lobbying from developers to get it defunded under Walker. So, and I imagine those forces are still at play. But yeah, certainly those lobbying forces, but just certainly, yeah, the city, if we wanted to step up as a formal entity and say, hey, state, we want to write you a letter and say, refund your program or whatever, however that would look, yeah, that would be an option, yep.
okay, all right.
Wade, we have to remember that the town of Dunn still has an active program that they use every year. And they may not have the funding every year to buy some, but that program is still there intact.
Yep. And that's where, again, I to Roger's point, I mean, again, my only thought would be just staff time, but yeah, you could literally develop a program. I mean, just like we developed RDC or rural event venue policy. I mean, it'd be a lot more work, but we can develop something to get it on the books as a vision and a plan. And then we seek out funding, or maybe the city decides to fund it at some point. So yeah, you could certainly develop something, and then if and when funding appears, you're ready to roll.
So my sense is that I think we've got the cart before the horse, way before the horse, in talking about how PDR would get funded, because before you decide how you'd fund PDR, you have to decide whether PDR is a tool that you want to use. And before you decide that, you have to decide whether we as a city want an urban growth boundary. And to me, I think we got to make that decision first. I mean, it makes no difference where the funding is going to come from PDR if we don't have the political will to establish an urban growth boundary in the first place.
And like I said in my slide, I mean, you're right. I mean, the first step would need to be policy direction from council. The second step would be develop a vision and a plan. And the third step would be to identify funding. In the Rock County example, part of the impetus for development of the program was because the funding existed and there was policy direction. At this point, we have neither policy direction nor funding.
Yeah, and policy direction, I mean, that's a difficult decision, because there will be arguments by many that this is going to hem us in the future and that they don't want to do that to future councils. Mark, I agree with you. You and I are on the same page. I would like to see something like this happen, but I don't know whether we've got the political will at council to do this. And until we determine whether or not we really want to permanently set aside some of Fitchburg for agriculture and open space, unless we're going to make that political decision, there's really no point in spending time on Pete. And that's where I'm a little hesitant to table the whole thing, because really what I think we need to address first is, do we want an urban growth boundary? A permanent one?
Tabling it is a pretty easy thing to do, Ed, and then that gives you a whole year to kind of do some, let's table it for a year, and then it gives us a year to see what the council's, there can be some research done into it that's pretty low pressure. But like I say, when we did the comp plan last time, there was very little discussion. Those options were not given. If those options had been given to the public at that point in time, I think it would have been a very different picture.
Is there current urban boundary right now that
Well,
encompass some ag?
Sort of, yes. I mean, we've got a comp plan, and we've got a FUDA identified.
I was just wondering how
As long
much-
as you stay within that FUDA, yeah, you have a de facto urban growth boundary, except that can be moved in the future.
Right, so what we're looking at is changing,
Right.
changing the existing urban growth boundary,
Not changing it, well, necessarily.
extending it.
Not even,
No.
you could just
Making it
make
more
them,
permanent.
make
Make
it
it more
permanent, or
permanent.
identify where a permanent one would be. If
But
not,
even,
where
even,
it's
even to
current.
that point, a future council could still undo that, correct?
Depending on how
mean,
it's written.
What's that?
Depending on how it's written, you're correct.
Well, I mean, I've always heard I've heard our city attorney, you can't tie the hands of a future council. So I just think there needs to be, again, a recognition of,
Yeah.
at some level, everything is reversible,
Oh, I'm not,
policy-wise.
I'm not so sure of that, but I'd like to look at the town of Dunn's and see how that was written, and I think you may find it's pretty hard to undo.
Well, no,
Well, no,
and
no,
that-
no,
that's
no,
what
I'm just-
PDR does. I mean,
I
I
mean,
think what Wade is
you
saying
can't-
is, if you
I'm
set
just
an
saying,
urban growth
and
boundary and don't back it
sorry.
up with PDR, then it can be changed in the future.
Yep.
I see.
But
Yeah, I mean,
but
understand.
why talk
An
about
easement will
whether we're gonna
remain.
do
An easement is-
PDR until we
but what I'm
determine whether
saying,
or not?
a urban growth policy can always be changed.
Yes, I agree with
Yeah.
you, Wade.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think if we want to talk about an urban growth boundary, then we should talk about that.
I agree with you at 100%, and the only reason I'm bringing it up now and trying to work through the process is because when the last
Yeah.
FUDA was there was very little discussion of that. That was not an option given to the public.
We kind of ended up largely relying on a prior plan where a lot more thought was given to that. And then I was happy that we pretty much stuck with it at this point. But,
I mean, if I had my druthers, if I owned a strip across, that would be the end of it.
I guess my question is, do we want to have further discussion at this body and, at a future meeting of setting an urban growth boundary?
I would agree with you. I think we've got to find out really how this fits into the overall picture of what we want Fitchburg to look like and where we want to really do it. It's just almost like an amendment to the comprehensive plan when we start to develop, hey, we want this to be forever ag land. So I'll tell you what, I would think about just tabling this right now with no deadline on it, just to bring it back as we see fit between now and whenever we get it. But I think we ought to look at the map of Fitchburg. We ought to really start to think, way in the future and start setting something up so the future councils have got something to play with or work with. I'm all for getting something on the books, knowing that it may or may not, it won't be used right away, but we're ready to go. We're being proactive instead of reactive. So I would like to make a motion that we simply table this at this time.
I'll second it.
A motion and a second. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. That's the last official item on the agenda.
hope
Are
we
there
bring it up
any
in a year.
staff report or announcements?
I would hope we bring it up in a year.
You got the option, it's open-ended.
Yep.
If there's no set time.
Wade, did you have anything else?
No, nothing.
Okay, do we have anything coming up? Any agenda items? We need to determine when the next meeting would be, I guess.
Yeah, maybe I should have just, this will take me 2 minutes, but I should have clarified next steps in the egg accessory stuff we spent the months talking about. So I think probably what makes sense is for staff to present everything you guys recommended for approval to the plan commission as a educational item in April. And then assuming, and Ed, you'll obviously be part of that discussion. And then assuming plan commission understands those changes, is comfortable with them, then we would start the formal referral process, which means staff prepares documentation, basically a resolution to council with those changes. Council will then kick it back out to probably Ag and Rural, Plan Commission, maybe a few other committees. Those committees will all weigh in on it, provide their feedback. All that feedback goes back to council, and then council ultimately approves, modifies, or denies the changes. So again, assuming we go to Plan Commission in April with an informational, educational item, staff would probably start that referral process very soon after, May and June. And then I would say by June, end of June-ish, we would have direction from the council on all that stuff all those changes we talked about.
So we may then skip April.
Yeah, so I don't think,
and look
we
at
don't need a
May
meeting
or
in the
a
next
June
couple
meeting.
months. Nothing's coming down the
Unless-
pike that I'm aware of in terms of our RDC, but if anything does come down the pike, we can just schedule as needed. So yeah, I guess we can set I don't know, it makes sense to set I think we should just wait and see
I agree.
how that referral process lays out, and then we may have like a June meeting,
Sure.
if not one earlier. So, and I think we can just I guess we could just pencil in a June meeting at the normal date, which would be the third Tuesday, if that works for people at this point.
Yep, let's plan for that unless something comes up intervening.
So June 15th, 4 PM.
Okay,
All right, okay. Okay,
sounds good.
Thanks, Wade. Super job.
Yep, thank you.
yeah, no,
Wade.
thank you all, yep.
All in favor? Aye. Motion passes, meeting adjourned. Thanks.
Yeah.